Welcome to the Center for Sports Studies podcast. My name is Brandon Podgorski, professor of sport management at Trine University, and I want to welcome you to this week's podcast. On today's podcast, I am joined by current scout for the Utah Jazz, Brian Pauga. For the past 2 decades, Brian has worked as a scout with 3 NBA teams and as the general manager for the G League's Austin Spurs. In this episode, Brian talks about the role that scouts play in assisting the front office with player identification, the draft, and potential trades. He also discusses the path to becoming a scout in the NBA and the skills needed to be successful. You can learn more about Brian by visiting his website, www.breakintobasketball.com. I hope you enjoy the show. And today we want to welcome NBA scout Brian Pauga to the show. Brian, welcome to the Center for Sports Studies podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. You know, we talked just a little bit before we started recording, and it's always great to have somebody from the scouting side of things with us because inevitably that's what we have a lot of students who want to get into. Anytime I ask freshmen, hey, what do you want to do for a living? The number one answer is, I want to be a GM. Right. And there's only about 30 to 32 available in baseball, basketball, football, and hockey and what have you. So it's great because with your background, and we'll get into it, you're scouted, you've been a GM at a really high level. So that's going to be great for our students to learn. But just first, just give us an overview. What's your background and how did you work your way up to become a NBA or a G League GM and also a scout with Utah?
Yeah. So when I was in college, I realized in high school, like I wasn't gonna be good enough to play at a high level in college. Baseball and basketball were my 2 sports. So what I ended up doing, I was at Michigan State University, and I went there for business management, and then actually tried out to be a student manager with the men's basketball team, and ended up getting selected to be one my freshman year, and ended up doing that for 4 years. And I realized pretty quickly that I wanted to work in the sports world once I got done with college, and it was a challenge. I knew it was going to be a challenge, but had some people that I worked with at Michigan State help direct me and kind of give me advice on the types of people to reach out to. And so I was able to get some interviews and opportunities my senior year, and ultimately I landed basketball operations internship with the San Antonio Spurs, which was crazy because they had literally just won the NBA championship like 10 days before I started.
Wow.
So it was very lucky there. It was like their 4th title in 7 years at the time or something like that. And so I'm starting with the best team in the NBA right out of college. And it was a 1-year position. Got to do a little bit of everything, take notes, pick players up when they came in for workouts and different events. Like I said, notes in every kind of meeting that the front office had, organizing our scouting database, just all kinds of odds and ends project, anything I could do to make the GM and the front office staff's job easier, basically.
Yep.
And I honestly didn't know if I was going to stay after that year, and someone else left, and it ended up opening a spot, and ended up staying, and then ended up spending 9 years in San Antonio, working my way up in different roles, and then been with a couple organizations since. Timberwolves for 3.5, and now the Jazz for about 4.
Well, I think starting as a student manager, and you had the benefit of being in a place like Michigan State, which a lot of our students are going to be excited about, being just right across the border here. But, great legacy there with Tom Izzo and being a D1 program and sending you guys to the NBA and having some of those connections there. But that's a great place for students to start. As somebody who coached college basketball myself, because you really get involved in everything. And if you really work hard and hustle, it's been my experience that coaches will continue to add on things for you. And I'm assuming that must have been your experience. And any great, maybe anecdotal Coach Izzo stories you could give us real quick?
So the first thing on the role I had at Michigan State, like what I learned more than anything was just the attention to detail on things. Like, everyone sees the glitz and glamour of the games and game night and the excitement around that, and we all enjoy that if we like sports. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes day to day, and being able to be a part of that and have a lot of different roles in getting to those game nights was really eye-opening. And frankly, like it's a lot of work on top of me being in school and me being in class. Like you said, like the staff can see who they can trust and who they can count on to get things done. And that's the same thing I see in the real world at the three different NBA organizations I've been at. Uh, they want people they can trust, and like people don't want to have to micromanage you. So, that was a big thing. And the one Coach Izzo story that I'll give you is one. I think it was my second year. I was running the clock during practice, and we're in the arena, and they're playing some sort of game, and whatever play would happen, a couple of players messed up the coverage or something, and the other team scored, and so they lost. And coach was a little upset, and he said, "All right, get on the line, down and back, or a suicide or whatever it was in 22 seconds or whatever,
Mhm.
like whatever time it was on there." And the game had literally just ended, so the clock was at 0. So you can't set the shot clock to 22 and have it run when the clock's at 0. So I had to set both of them, but he went so quick, I didn't get it set till like they were already down one end of the court. So he was mad at me, and he said, "All right, you messed up there running. You get on the line and run a suicide in front of the whole team." So I had to run a suicide in front of the whole team while they're all clapping for me as I probably very slowly run a suicide.
Well, at least, maybe hopefully it lightened up practice and it showed some buy-in. And, I think to a certain extent, again, relying on my coaching experience, everybody has to be on board. Like you just nailed it. And I'm sure it's the same way in what you're doing right now in Utah and in San Antonio. Like everybody has to be tugging on the rope to win because it's so daggone competitive at those high levels.
No, absolutely. And then like you said, I mean, what I always say is everyone has to be pushing in the same direction. There's a lot of people involved in an NBA organization, from the business side to the basketball side to the coaches, to ownership. Like there's a lot of big personalities and people that have big ideas, but everyone needs to be pushing in the same direction so that we can all try and reach those common goals. Because if you're at a place where you're trying to one up each other internally,
Mhm.
it's just not going to be productive and efficient use of anyone's time.
Yeah. Um, did you feel like it was a disadvantage for you not being a player in college or not being a professional player? Or does that really matter for those students? We're at a D3, they're not going pro, not to break their heart. Um, they're not going to have that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, when you're around, the higher level you're around and have exposure to, and the bigger the team is, that can be, or the operation is, I should say, the bigger the operation, the more you can learn because there's just going to be
Okay.
that many more components. But to me, like, I did not think I had a disadvantage. I mean, look, there's certain guys who play in the NBA and know they want to coach or go in the front office when they're done that can get a job, because they have a lot of experience in the NBA as well. Like, so there is that component, but I think it's a misnomer to say like you have to have played at a D1 or uh, played in the NBA to really have a chance to work in it. Like, I think it's about getting experience. Like, you have to give yourself experience in the sports world, because like I said, it is a lot of hours, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of things to do on a day-to-day basis that is not for everyone.
Yep.
Like, again, people all like the games, but when you get down to it, like, you're going to be working on weekends, you're going to be traveling late at night, you're going to miss holidays, you're going to miss family time, if you want to do things right and you want to advance in the industry. And there's a lot of careers in a lot of different fields that are the same way, but like that's not for everyone. And I think I've seen a lot of people over my 20 years that have just struggled with that time commitment, and that kind of eliminates them at some level. So to me, it's about organizing what kind of positions you want to apply for and try and get, and being strategic on how you're going about that. Because I don't think a lot of people really understand how to go about trying to work in the industry, and they don't know who to reach out to. They don't know what the hiring process is, um, whether it's job board postings on different roles that are available
Mhm.
versus things that aren't even posted, that are in like internships in front offices are typically not posted
Yep.
on job boards. So you're not going to see those unless you're being creative on who you're reaching out to.
And those are things I definitely want to get into as we get further into our discussion here today. But you talked about you've been a scout in San Antonio, Minnesota. Now you've been at Utah for the past 3 or 4 years. Talk to us about the scouting component of it. We can get into the GM too, but especially the scouting. And we'll talk about your website. But what are your responsibilities as a scout in the NBA?
Yeah, so my responsibilities are basically like to get to know any and all players that are in the draft. At San Antonio, Minnesota, I was doing draft stuff, international stuff, and pro stuff a little bit more balanced on those three. With
Okay.
Utah, I'm doing much more college draft focused, and we have a lot of draft picks coming up. And my job is to know anything and everything about the players, both on and off the court, that I can, basically to help us as an organization make the best decisions possible for us.
And what does that involve? Are you going to games, watching a lot of film, talking to coaches? I'm assuming it's a combination of all three. But do you kind of have a home base and you're all over the road, or what's that look like?
Yeah, so I'm actually based in the Chicago area,
Okay.
which is pretty centrally located, and so I can drive to a lot of places, which helps. Um, but yes, I'm on the road a lot. Like I just got back 2 hours ago from a game last night,
Okay.
and you know was gone the last few days. Got another one Saturday and Sunday coming up, so I'm on the road probably half the month seeing games. It's a little easier, like you know, if I go to a game on Wednesday night in at Northwestern, it's
Right.
I can be home all day at my house with the family and whatnot. And then I leave at 4:30, 5 o'clock to go to the game, and then I drive back after. So like that, those days help because it's a little more, you're at home a little bit more versus being on a plane and having to travel. So to your point, like it's a combination of being at games live, watching games on TV and film, and a lot of tape, and then talking to a lot of people who have been around that player, to help us understand kind of what we're getting into with that player when and if we bring him into the organization.
And that's something I wanted to follow up with. You don't have to be specific with the Jazz, but just kind of like maybe a broad overview. When you're scouting players, and maybe the philosophies are different with different teams, but what are you kind of looking for? Like if I wanted to be an NBA scout, what do I need to understand about the game or about like tendencies or things we're looking for in players that are going to be the best fit for the home club?
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, like every organization is going to be a little different on what types of players they want. Um, I can't get into some specifics on what
Right.
we're looking for, but for us, like you got to figure out what your organization values, what kind of players you want and people you want, and then you're filling in as many gaps in the information as you possibly can, because we're
Okay.
only allowed to spend limited amount of time with the actual player during the draft process. So we're relying on relationships and people that we know who have been around each player. And there's a lot of players, so there's a lot of coaches and a lot of staff at these different universities that we're talking to people, and it's just a process to try and get as much information as we can, and
Mhm.
whether it be on film or about the person or injuries, different things, analytics, and then make the best decision we can from there.
So kind of the traditional way of scouting, maybe up until the last couple decades, the eyeball test and talking to coaches and all those things. You just mentioned analytics. How important have analytics become in basketball? Because we know there's been this explosion in baseball since kind of the sabermetrics were ushered in the early 2000s. Has basketball caught up to that too?
I don't know if it's caught up to baseball, because baseball definitely had a head start on it, but there's been a big push on the analytic front across the NBA. And to your question, like it's very important to how we evaluate. Like we're looking at anything we can numbers wise, in terms of how players perform or home road, top competition versus lower level competition, like whatever it might be. Like there's a ton of different analytical stuff where we're looking at to try and help us evaluate the player. So it goes hand in hand with the eye test and the other things we see and hear about a player.
Okay. So do students need those skills in order to, especially let's go to your time as like as a GM, it seems like, and again, baseball's different, but it seems like you're getting a lot of guys with kind of that analytical background starting to get some of these front office roles. Do they need that for basketball? Is experience a little bit more important, actual experience of the game, or is a little bit of a combination of the two?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. Like you want to be as well rounded as you can. There's going to be different strengths of each staff member,
Mhm.
whether it be from the scouting side, from the analytics side, from the strategy and cap side, legal background type side. Like there's a lot of lawyers who are in front offices now who can understand the salary cap and the collective bargaining agreement and all that kind of thing. So there's you want to have a blend of all of them at some level. You want to be able to know how to operate in all the spaces in the front office if possible. But again, you have to rely on your own personal strength. So to your question, like it's hard to like for students to just say like, hey, I'm going to learn analytics, by myself, like
Mhm.
before I'm actually working for an organization is it's hard to do that fully until you're integrated in. You can see all the information and all the technology that teams have. I mean, there are public sites that you can go on and learn. And there's even NBA.com, like looking at the different stats and breakdowns they have. Like, so you can educate yourself on like the types of things teams are looking at and like the advanced statistics, some of those metrics that are pretty somewhat common across sports sites now for
Yep.
basketball. But it's something that you want to get some experience. Like no one's going to expect you to come in as an intern and be an expert at cap or analytics or scouting because you just haven't had that hands-on experience and the real world experience. So there's going to be a learning curve on that. But like if you can, there's some pretty reputable sites about the collective bargaining agreement that have information about the rules and like kind of give you a layman's version like of it. So I think that is those types of sites are good to see. Larry Kuhn has a great site that kind of gives like the average NBA fan a somewhat dummied down version, taking out some
Mhm.
of all the legal verbiage, let's say, so it can give people a better understanding of kind of how trades happen, how players are signed, different like, and it's a long website if you want to take the time to go through it, but it's a much simpler version than the 600, 700 page collective bargaining agreement is. And same with analytics, like there's so much you can delve into, but it's just a question of how deep do you want to go. And then with the scouting side, like to me, like you can always get to know players. Like you can never know too many players, like because
Mm.
you're always learning from the last player. Like why did they have success in college but not in the NBA, or why did they not play as well in college but then they're flourishing as an NBA player? Like there's different circumstances that you got to understand for every player, and you can always learn. Like just because I've been doing this for 17 years doesn't mean I'm going to get every pick right. Like everyone's going to
Yep.
get picks wrong and decisions wrong, but you're just trying to get as much information as you can before having to make those decisions, and then make the best decision for your franchise from there.
So you just talked about getting picks right or getting picks wrong. Like for a scout, and you've done this as a scout, and I'm sure maybe as a GM with scouts underneath you, how are you guys measured, or when you're evaluated, what is considered wins for you guys and losses for you guys?
Yeah, I mean it's somewhat of an arbitrary type of scale, but
Sure.
it's really making sure that like I said, you're not going to get everyone right, but I think you're measured on being as prepared as you can. Like
Okay.
it's easy with the number of sheer volume of players and tape and information out there that you can miss certain things or let certain things fall through the cracks. So as thorough as you can be as an organization and making sure you don't miss something in the intel or something in the scouting in the film or something in his analytic background, like those are as big as anything, because like again, you're some of it you're predicting how a player is going to handle the hardest league in the world.
Hmm.
And there's some of the players that come in the NBA are gonna fail or face adversity for the first time because they've just been the best player up until that point. And how are they going to deal with that mentally and physically when they reach those hurdles throughout their career? And those are things that are not easy to predict for anybody.
Yep.
It's just you're predicting human behavior, and that's a hard thing to predict. So it's not an exact science like on draft night that we can just say this is like you're going to have your evaluations and your rankings,
Mhm.
but there's just so many variables that go into that that you're going to be guessing at some level that you have to just be as prepared as you can with that information and make educated decisions based on that information at the time.
So, what have been some of your success stories with players that you've scouted that maybe have gotten drafted high and it's like, hey, that was a home run, or even guys that maybe were off the radar that eventually became pretty solid NBA players?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in San Antonio, we had a couple pretty good picks in the late 20s that we identified and they ended up working out. George Hill was one, Kyle
Oh, wow.
Anderson, Tiago Splitter. So there were some pretty good players that really helped our team. But the biggest one for us was a move we made on draft night to trade up for Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah.
That was a big pick for our franchise at the time, and it turned into him being a great player who really helped us a lot, obviously has become an unbelievable talent. So, it's something that really is enjoyable when you make a big move and it works.
So how are those conversations, how do those conversations work with the people making the decision? And like, I'm assuming it's maybe the president of the club or president of basketball ops, the GM, whoever it's going to be. Like, are they just taking all the information that they can and just making the best decision possible? Or is it a little bit more kind of structured conversation process in making picks and trades and things like that?
Yeah, no, it's all very structured. Like there's a lot of work that goes into this. I mean, we have meetings all the time about the players in this current draft and evaluating them and kind of talking about them. Like we don't have to make decisions until the end of June when the draft is, but we're constantly going through different scenarios and ideas and trade options. Like as a GM, you have so many things coming at you and so many opportunities and it's just hard to make trades because you got to get everyone on your own team to agree,
Mhm.
in your front office and kind of be on the same page, and you got to get another team uh, to agree as well from their end, and so just making sure there's 99.9% of trades that are discussed between two different teams don't end up happening. I
Wow.
mean, it just it takes a lot of time and effort, and there's so much that goes behind the scenes uh, to get to an actual trade or to a free agent signing or to a draft pick. Like any player that comes in or goes out of the organization, it's a long process to get that decision made. And it's a very structured process to get to that. And again, like we're not going to get every decision right,
Mhm.
but we have to make the best decision uh, for the organization at the time, uh, and then go from there.
Well, and there's so many external things that play into it, I'm sure, as well, with, agents and just player preferences and things like that. Um, as your time as a GM, in the G League, what would you say are the differences between that level and in an NBA GM? Like, what are some of the things you guys are doing? Do you have control over the players? Or is it just a few, the two-way guys? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's changed a little bit. It's changed a lot over the last 17 years, but now with two-way contracts, I mean, you're having more player movement from the NBA team to the G League team. So there's just more movement and uh more eyes on the G League, frankly. Like to answer your first question, like as the GM of the G League team, you're doing the same things that NBA GM does. It's just at a league one level lower. Like it's the league below the NBA. Like it's the players going to develop, and you know what the hard part in the G League is two things. Like one, the players and staff, they all have goals to make the NBA. They want to coach or work in the NBA, and players want to play in the NBA, which we understand. Like we want guys that want to play in the NBA. You want to have goals and to try and get there, but they're in the G League at that time. So you have to get the everyone to buy into like, hey, we're in the G League. We got to work as a group to get ourselves those opportunities. And the more we succeed as a team, the better. And to your point about the two ways and players coming back and forth from the NBA team, like they're going to go back and forth. And, some players don't like the G League or they get an opportunity overseas, or, more players, a player comes back from overseas to the G League. Like the player movement is a lot more in the G League, and you're not
Hmm.
going to know your roster from day to day. Like if you have an injury with the NBA team, all of a sudden one of your two-way guys is going to be with the big club, or someone gets called up to another team, and like so your team just changes constantly. And so that is very difficult from a um, mentality standpoint for the other players on the team.
Yeah.
And if they don't buy in, like some guys might play 30 minutes tonight, and then tomorrow night a player comes from the NBA team, and all of a sudden you go down to playing 10 minutes.
Mm.
And how do you still get that player to be as engaged? And it's a hard deal because you could be playing great and be playing, you're the best player on the team, playing 30, 35 minutes. And then an NBA player gets assigned to the team, and all of a sudden you're playing 10. And how are you going to deal with that? And can you handle a different role? Like, so the mental aspects of the G League is very challenging for players and staff. And as a GM, having to go through and kind of help people through those ups and downs, and that player movement was a lot more of a learning experience and something you don't get to experience in the NBA because there's not quite as much player transactions day to day. Like you
Yeah.
pretty much have your roster, then the trade deadline. Like you're going to change certain things, but it's a lot of the same players for much of the season where the G League roster is just constantly churning over. So it's much more of a day to day managing.
Certainly make things a little more interesting, maybe at,
Yeah.
at points. But I know we've got a little bit more time left, so I want to make sure that we talk about, not only are you working in scouting, but you're helping students try to get their break. Again, so many want to get into the GM, and I think kind of maybe starting in that coaching, scouting, and learning what it is that you need to know about player identification and how to work as part of a bigger team, on the front office side, and then eventually working your way up. I think that's so important. So tell us a little bit what you're doing working with students, and about your website, breaking into basketball.
Yeah. So I get obviously me being a student manager, like I know firsthand like how challenging it was to get to where I'm at. And I know I've gotten lucky as well, but you know, I get the question all the time from students like, hey, I want to get in. Like, what has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? How should I go about it? What type of position am I good for? Like, what types of positions are open? Like, those types of questions I get all the time. And, you know, it's hard for me to jump on a call with every student that reaches out to me on LinkedIn or texts me or emails me. So what I did, like, created a break into basketball on the website. You said it, www.breakintobasketball.com. And it's something that I do a 2 hour course one time a month. And it's one time thing for people, but you know, it's a very comprehensive view of what has my journey been, what has worked for me. Then secondarily, like, what does a front office look like? What is the composition of this staff? Like, what types of roles would I be a candidate for? What does a coaching staff look like? How many people are on a coaching staff? A G League staff, same thing. And then giving a list of types of positions you should be applying for, when you should go about that, what does an interview process look like, when should you be reaching out, like the types of people you need to be reaching out to, like all those types of things. And obviously there's a lot more crammed into that 2 hours. And then at the end, I stay on as long as I can for any questions that anyone has. And you know, just answering, because everyone's going to have a different understanding of the NBA. Some want to work in college, some might want to work in other sports. I mean, other sports are very similar too. You just have to be strategic on how you're going about trying to get those positions, because they are very competitive. And to what we talked about earlier, like, I don't think it's something where you have to have played or you have to, like, have a certain experience to be able to get these roles. Like, I've worked with a number of D3, D2 people in the NBA. Like, and they're great. Like, there's great people at every level. It doesn't matter because you went to Michigan State or you're at a D2 or a D3 or JUCO, whatever it is, or you're doing something else. You work in high school basketball or AU basketball. Like, there's a lot of different opportunities and experiences that can help a front office. And so we're always looking for different types of candidates, but I think it's just an overwhelming process to go about trying to get that role and to get those types of jobs for people. And this course is designed to try and help assist you on understanding ways to to have a chance to be more successful.
So that's breakintobasketball.com. They also have a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And then, Brian, I know you're on LinkedIn as well, and you mentioned that. So I'm sure if students want to follow you, they can follow you there as well. We got just about a minute or two left. I did want to ask you one thing, kind of last question. Are these jobs in scouting, are they posted, or how important is networking and knowing people in the industry?
Networking is paramount to everything. Like,
Okay.
I've been doing
Yep.
it 20 years, and like, I'm still trying to meet as many coaches and staff and people at other teams, college level, internet, like anywhere you can get information and get to know people, because it's a small industry once you're in it,
Yep.
and you get to know people pretty well. But the networking aspect is big, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there to try and meet people. You know, some people you reach out to might not respond. You know, they might not hit your email back or respond to you on LinkedIn or whatever it is, but that doesn't mean you need to stop reaching out to other people. All it takes
Yep.
is, I always say, and this was ingrained in me from someone I worked with in San Antonio, like, all it takes is one team or organization to say yes to you.
Yep.
And if you just need one team to give you that opportunity, and then you can make the most of it from there. And you don't know who that one person that might lead you to get to that one spot is.
And so that's Brian Pauga, scout with the Utah Jazz and longtime basketball executive in scouting and GM. You can check out breakintobasketball.com. And Brian, we really appreciate you being on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Be sure to check out our social media pages for our next guest on January 26th. As always, we'd like to say a special thank you to producer Josh Hornbacher for his work behind the scenes. This is the Center for Sports Studies podcast, broadcasting from the Trine Broadcasting Network. If you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the Center for Sports Studies podcast on your favorite podcasting platform and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you heard. For more information about the Center for Sports Studies, please visit trine.edu. Also, be sure to like the Trine Center for Sports Studies on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and X at Trine CSS, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.